So today we start our session 3 of leiomyoma, and this would take you to treatment of leiomyomas, the medical and surgical treatment. We have divided this into two parts. The part 1 is for 1 hour. This is a medical treatment, and then we will have a small break of 10 minutes, and then we will have a surgical treatment of leiomyoma for the next 40 to 45 minutes. So let us start with the management of leiomyoma. So in the last lectures you have seen that the major symptoms of leiomyoma which require treatment are basically abnormal uterine bleeding, and some of them are associated with pain, and along with the bleeding there is anemia. Depending upon the site of the fibroid, they may have pressure symptoms, and a part of it are concerned with fertility or subfertility. We also saw that about 50 to 70% of leiomyoma are accidental finding, and they are basically asymptomatic. So when we are treating leiomyoma, we have to decide what we have to treat. What we have to do with the asymptomatic leiomyomas, what we have to do those who are producing symptoms of abnormal uterine bleeding or pressure symptoms or pain, and what of those who desire fertility. So we will divide our management into these three topics. Worldwide, the treatment of uterine fibroid is traditionally surgical, and most common reason for hysterectomy worldwide is uterine fibroid. No medical therapy can be completely cure fibroid. So the usual teaching which we do, it will depend upon the factors like the age of the patient at the time of presentation, whether she is parous or not, whether the fibroids are asymptomatic or symptomatic, is the fibroid associated with pregnancy, is the fibroid associated with infertility, that is her desire for further pregnancy. This is the most common cause of treatment, and depending upon the size and location of the fibroids and the general health of the patient, our treatment would differ. So when do you treat myomas? So these are the 6 to 7 points where you have to treat myomas. So all symptomatic fibroids presenting with abnormal uterine bleeding, presenting with pain, pressure symptoms, presenting with infertility, or have an obstetric issue, all have to be treated. The dictum goes that all submucous fibroids have to be treated. When do you treat asymptomatic fibroids? Normally they don't require any treatment, but if they are very large in size, more than 12-week size or 14-week size, they require removal. Any myoma which shows a progressive increase in size needs to be removed. Fibroids with infertility, when other factors have been ruled out and it seems that their removal would enhance her fertility, they have to be removed. When you are treating fibroids, you have to take care of the anemia part where the patient has heavy menstrual bleeding, and if the fibroids are producing pressure symptoms, then maybe anteriorly, maybe posteriorly, or towards the intestine, we saw in the last lectures, so they need to be treated. Now I mentioned the term 12-week size or 14-week size. Now when you are assessing the size of the fibroid, you compare it with the pregnancy week. So if this is the normal picture of genital tract, a fibroid which is palpable at the level of the pubic symphysis corresponds to the pregnant uterus at pubic symphysis, and that is a 3 months uterus. So you say that the fibroid is 12-week size fibroid. And when similarly up to the level of umbilicus, if that growth reaches up to the level of umbilicus, which corresponds to the pregnancy of 20 weeks uterus, you say 20-week size fibroid. That is how you mention clinically the weeks by fibroid. So these are the indications of when you want to treat fibroid. ACOG, that is American College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists, also take asymptomatic fibroids as a Apart from those with heavy menstrual bleeding and pain and urinary problems or pressure symptoms, those who are otherwise asymptomatic, if those fibroids are affecting the mental health of the patient, they may be a reason to or concern to remove them. Then coming to the treatment of fibroids, we divide it into 4 categories. The expectant treatment, that is you just wait and watch. Then medical treatment, surgical treatment, and then other treatments or other methods, in which uterine artery embolization is one. So how do you manage leiomyoma? Point 1 is observation, that is simply wait and watch. Most of the fibroids which are asymptomatic, you can just wait and watch, just keep them under observation and do a serial pelvic sonography and pelvic examinations to know their condition. Another type of management is pre-surgical shrinkage. That is, when you are planning surgery and you are buying time for it, then you'd give her some medical treatment so that it decreases the size of fibroid, say by about 50 to 70%. And you can give also the GnRH agonist and antagonist for 3 to 6 months, which would decrease the size of fibroids. We'll see to it in medical management. In the surgical management, we have myomectomy and hysterectomy. Myomectomy means removal of the fibroid only, preserving the uterus, and thus it preserves the fertility and various modalities of doing myomectomy. Then we can do hysterectomies and various modalities, and of course it is a definitive treatment and it is usually done for those whose fertility is complete. And then we have other treatment, one of which is embolization. Here it preserves the uterus, it's an interventional radiotherapy, but of course it doesn't guarantee fertility. So these are the management protocols of fibroid. Now we talked of a terminology as expectant or wait and watch. Now in which fibroids we can advise them to wait and watch? When you are absolutely certain of the diagnosis, that the diagnosis is fibroid and fibroid itself and no other comorbidities associated with the patient. If the patient is completely asymptomatic and it's a chance finding, suppose you find on a sonography a 3 centimeter fibroid which is not producing any symptoms to the patient, neither bleeding nor pressure symptoms nor pain, and the patient is as such unaware of it, and on a routine scan, on a routine examination you find this. Such patients you can just observe them for a while and just have the expectant policy. The fibroids with no evidence of uterine compression, that is no pressure symptoms. The size of the fibroids usually less than 12 weeks or 14 weeks size, because as they grow in size, they itself becomes an indication, even when they are asymptomatic, they become an indication to remove the fibroid. And of course, the most important point is they have to be willing for follow-up. Then that is, you want to follow these patients serially by sonography after 3 to 6 months, and therefore these are the criteria where you can have an expectant or wait or watch management. Now fibroid is asymptomatic, but it warrants treatment. What are the situations where the fibroid as such is asymptomatic and you are not taking a wait and watch policy? One is the size of fibroid is more than 12 to 14 weeks size. That is, it is an asymptomatic, because we have seen that most of the fibroids are painless and they grow in size, especially the subserous ones. They may grow in the abdomen and it may acquire huge dimensions. So those fibroids which are large enough, about more than 12 weeks size, which can be palpated per abdomen, even if they are asymptomatic, have to be removed. A previously asymptomatic fibroid but it has rapidly started growing, that has to be removed. If there is evidence of compression, that is, they are producing pressure symptoms, maybe hydroureter, maybe hydronephrosis, they have to be removed. Subserous pedunculated fibroid, which are likely to undergo torsion of the pedicle, it is better to remove them. All those fibroids which are asymptomatic, but the patient has anemia for any other reason, correction of anemia with hematinic, iron and folic acid, or replacement by blood or packed cells should be done, and they can give us simple measures to reduce the blood loss. Now we talked of preserving the uterus. So when and why do you want to preserve the uterus? And why not do a hysterectomy straight away? So when the patient requests that she wants to have her regular menstrual cycle, of course when a patient wants fertility and reproductive function has to be preserved. And one more reason is that the presence of uterus supports the ovary in its hormonal harmony. So moving to the perspectives of medical therapy for myomas. Now what are the reasons for doing medical therapy? You want to treat symptoms, that is symptomatic fibroids, you are treating them medically. You want to buy time to postpone surgery, that is you are planning surgery later of 3 months, and therefore during that period you give them certain medications, and this would have its own advantages. Or suppose the patient is in the perimenopausal age group, suppose she has reached 43, 44 years of age and she has some fibroids, and in that case you start a medical therapy till she reaches her menopause, and therefore it would avoid her surgery. Then if you think that the patient is genetically predisposed, in those cases you can start medical treatment. In those cases, if the surgery has been done and the patient still has a high risk, in order to prevent the recurrence later, suppose she has a family history or you have done a myomectomy at a younger age, then you can continue with the post-op medical therapy. So these are the newer perspectives of medical therapy for myoma. So what do you do in medical therapy? In medical therapy, we have seen that no medical treatment completely eliminates fibroids. And apart from the usual drugs which we have seen and discussed in AUB, adenomyosis, the drugs remain the same. I would be discussing the newer agents. So the tranexamic acid for bleeding, NSAIDs for pain, GnRH agonists, we'll touch this, GnRH agonist and antagonist which have been used, progesterone pills, of course, all progesterone containing pills, or contraceptives, oral contraceptives with progesterone, combined pills, and progesterone containing IUCDs, that is the levonorgestrel devices. So these, most of them we have discussed again and again, and we will be discussing the newer ones, and we will be just touching those concerned with the fibroids. So this is the medical treatment of fibroids. We want medical management for, first and foremost, for the relief of symptoms. So all symptomatic fibroids with heavy menstrual bleeding require treatment. And what does the medical treatment do? It causes a reduction in the tumor size. And we discussed that two main reasons are also prior to menopause and preoperatively as adjunct to surgery. So before surgery, for a few months you can give medical therapy, and when the patient is reaching a perimenopausal age group, you can try a medical treatment. So medical treatment consists of correction of anemia, that is treatment of heavy menstrual bleeding, preoperative, that is decrease in size and vascularity of the fibroid. The main important treatment is infertility, that is to facilitate the surgery, either as hysteroscopic or laparoscopic. But you have to remember that medical management of fibroid does not improve fertility. The surgery has to be done if the fibroid is hampering fertility. You can give it as an alternative for surgery, as you have seen that in perimenopausal age group, and also for those who are at very high risk for surgery. In those cases you can refer to medical management. And temporary postponement for surgery, we discussed preoperative part. All said and done, whatever medical treatment you do, you are manipulating or you are acting at the level of hypothalamus or anterior pituitary or at the levels of ovaries, so you are dealing with the GnRH or with the FSH/LH or with the estrogen or progesterone. So the axis remains the same. So what are the drugs you use? Iron therapy and folic acid therapy for the correction of anemia. Antifibrinolytic like tranexamic acid for the correction of the heavy menstrual bleeding. Then we have progesterone receptors, progesterones. This we will be discussing in detail. For antiprogestins are new. Then GnRH agonists and GnRH antagonists are the ones which can be discussed. GnRH agonists are goserelin and leuprolide, and GnRH antagonists are cetrorelix and granulix. The synthetic steroids ranazole are not used nowadays, and of course we will discuss the other modalities also, and a newer drug ulipristal. Treatment difference due to pathophysiology. Now this slide I have taken it from the last lecture, and as you must be remembering that we discussed that the hormones have an influence on the growth of fibroid, and we discussed that both estrogen and progesterone have a influence on the growth of the fibroid. And in the pathophysiology of the fibroid development, we discussed three main hormones: progesterone and progressive progesterone receptors, aromatase function which is disturbed, and prolactin. And these we acknowledge that these are the important factors which affect the growth of the fibroid. So we would be discussing these three as a medical management. Progesterone and its receptors hence are potential targets for inhibiting the growth of myoma. So this new concept came out with various journals of human reproduction, of European Society of Human Reproduction, and various journals. They came out with the logic that progesterone plays a vital role in promoting the uterine fibroid growth. And the progesterone receptors binding is 3 times higher in fibroid as in the myometrium. So hence progesterone has a role in promoting the growth of fibroids. So what we can do here? This stimulated the interest in modulating the progesterone pathway, and then came into the existence the SPERMs, that is serum progesterone receptor modulators. They are the innovative therapy in uterine fibroid management. So what about SPERMs? They are selective progesterone receptor modulators, shortened as SPERMs, are new class of progesterone receptor ligands displaying tissue selective both agonist and antagonist properties. So when you give SPERMs, they act on the progesterone receptors both as an agonist and both as an antagonist, and they have a mixed activity on the target tissue cells which have progesterone receptors. So the current medical therapy includes these SPERMs. One is UPA, that is ulipristal acetate. Then there is another RU486 or mifepristone. Another name is esoprisnil, and then there is a telepristone acetate. Out of these serum progesterone receptor modulators, the one which has been approved is ulipristal acetate, which has been used for the treatment of uterine fibroids. It has certain specific dose dependent treatment, so we will be discussing how to give it, and this is one of the medical treatments which we can try out for fibroids. So drugs which regulate the progesterone receptors are now increasingly being used. They have the advantage over GnRH is that they can be given orally. Long-term use, of course, it is a progesterone, so if it has to be given for long time, it would have its endometrial effects. We discussed that ulipristal acetate is the SPERM which is used, and it has little impact on the estrogen levels, that is serum estradiol levels, as it is acting only and only on the progesterone receptors and is not affecting the estrogen receptors. whereas we saw that the GnRH were affecting both. The SPOMs, that is the serum receptor modulators with agonist and antagonist properties, have a selective tissue effect. That is, wherever the progesterone receptors are present, it would selectively act on those tissues only, with selectively on progesterone receptors only. And what they do? They induce apoptosis by suppressing the neovascularization. Apoptosis, when we discuss malignancy, we will be discussing the cell death, and neovascularization suppressing so that the blood supply is decreased and cell proliferation is decreased without suppressing the healthy tissue, and therefore they are acting on the fibroids to decreasing their size. Of course, it is undergoing various many studies, and the Pearl studies are in the phase 3. So what about ulipristal? Now ulipristal acts at 3 levels. It acts at the pituitary gland level, it acts on the progesterone receptors of the fibroid, and on the endometrium also it would act, being a progesterone. So it would have its effect on the endometrium. So taking it one by one. A first in its class effective, well tolerated serum progesterone receptor modulator, specifically designed for uterine fibroids. It has a reversible blockage of progesterone receptors, meaning that once you stop ulipristal, the effects are reversible. It binds only on the progesterone receptors, leaving behind the estrogen receptors. It has no affinity on mineralocorticoid receptors, hence those side effects are spared. And action only on the fibroid cells and not on the normal myometrial cells. That is when it is affecting the fibroids in the myometrium, it would affect purely and purely on the fibroid, and not rest of the myometrium is spared. So mode of action of ulipristal would be acting on the fibroids. It shows a pro-apoptotic and anti-proliferative action, decreasing the tumor necrosis factor, decreasing the fibroid size and volume. Acting on the HPA axis, it decreases the LH and FSH, and therefore the ovulation is inhibited and the cycles become anovulatory. And acting on the endometrium, it shows an anti-proliferative action and therefore amenorrhea. So the mode of action of ulipristal is on pituitary, is on fibroid, is on endometrium. Now what is the difference in dose? So ulipristal is used for the management of symptomatic uterine fibroids. We discussed that we are giving medical management only to those who are symptomatic. And what we are expecting, that they would reduce the signs and symptoms by reducing the size and vascularity. Now the dose is typical. The dose is 5 milligram. You can extend up to 10 milligram. OD means a single dose, has to be taken once a day, to be started at the first week of menstruation. So this is the first week of menstruation. So it has to be started in the first week of menstruation. It has to be given daily in a dose of 5 milligram, and then you continue in the second month and you continue in the third month. That is, you have given her for 90 days. Suppose she has her menses on the 1st of the January. So you start within a week, that is on the 5th or 7th of January. By 5th or 7th of January, you have to start ulipristal. You have to continue with a single dose of ulipristal the whole of the January. Then you continue her for the whole of the February and whole of the March. By end of the March, you give a 1 month gap, where she will have to stop the ulipristal, and then she will have her normal menstrual cycle and 130 days gap. And after the 30 days gap of April, on 1st of May, when she has her second menses, you again start within a week of the first week of menses. And then you give on a whole 30 days of May, then you give for another 1 month, and then another 1 month. So you give it on June and you give it in July. So this is one course and this is the second course. And that is you divide it how many courses you can give. So 3 months, then 1 month gap, then 3 months, then 1 month gap. This is how the dosing of ulipristal has to be done. So long-term treatment for moderate to severe symptoms of uterine fibroids in reproductive age group is the patient subject group where you have to give it. So the patient is in the reproductive age group. We divided the medical treatment into two: those who are on reproductive age group which may desire for fertility, and medical treatment being given in the perimenopausal age group, that is those who are just waiting for their menopause, so they are buying time. So intermittent dosing schedule, which has been recommended by various South Asian modalities of obstetrics and gynec. So we give it for 3 months, then give 1 month gap, then give for 3 months, then give 1 month gap. This 3 months plus 1 month becomes one course. Then this 3 month plus 1 month becomes the second course. So you have 8 months and 2 courses. Now, there is a terminology called PAEC. What is PAEC? It is progesterone associated endometrial changes. When you are giving these receptor modulators, you are giving it continuously for 3 months. So it is bound to have some effect on the endometrium. And what are these effects of progesterone on the endometrium? Are the cystic glandular dilatation. This has to be emphasized because it is not endometrial hyperplasia. We will be discussing endometrial hyperplasia, which is a different entity, which is a precancerous condition. So these progesterone associated endometrial changes are only causing cystic glandular dilatation. That is, the glands of endometrium are becoming cystic. This change is reversible when the drug is discontinued. And you have to assure the patient that she has not to be worried about this endometrium would shed off in her menses. So this is the PAEC or progesterone associated endometrial changes. So what are the clinical benefits of ulipristal once introduced? You are correcting anemia because you are giving it for 3 months where she is not having her menses. So you are saving her on menstrual blood loss. So at the same time, correction of anemia comes as a bonus. Your reduction, since the fibroid size is being reduced, the size of the fibroid is reduced, and when you go for surgery, the intraoperative blood loss would be less because the fibroid size has shrunken. Reduce operative time, of course, it is meant that when the size is less, the operating time would definitely be less. It reduces the need of blood transfusion since you have corrected anemia. So most of the fibroids cause severe anemia because of heavy menstrual bleeding. So once you have given it for 2 or 3 months, you have corrected the anemia. So blood transfusion and its disadvantages, you have saved the patient from this. And facilitation of myomectomy instead of hysterectomy. Suppose you are reducing the size, there are cases where the size is reduced so that you can just remove the myoma and preserve the uterus, so that by decreasing the size, the operation changes. Even mild anemia can lead to increased risk of morbidity and post-operative mortality. That is, it can range from the patient's weakness to her scar tissue which is not healing because of anemia. So when you correct the anemia in pre-op cases, then the healing becomes better. Intraoperative transfusion does not modify these risks. By reducing the fibroid volume and correcting anemia, UPA allows less invasive surgery. Ulipristal acetate, this has been put on red because ulipristal acetate does not disturb the surgical planes. This is very important because if you are planning a surgery after 3 months or 6 months and you are giving a drug which would affect its plane so that the surgery becomes more difficult, then you would try to avoid this. So it has to be very clear that ulipristal acetate does not disturb the surgical planes in patients who had undergone myomectomy for removal of the uterine fibroids later. So this is a point to be noted because it would be different from GnRH when we will be studying GnRH. Absolute and relative contraindications to ulipristal are: if the patient is pregnant or breastfeeding with fibroid, then pregnancy with fibroids or breast lactation with fibroids, you are not going to give this medical treatment. If it is associated with any cancer, be it of uterus or cervix or ovarian or breast cancer, you are not preferring this drug. If your cause of bleeding is not known, genital bleeding is not known, and it can be other causes also apart from fibroid bleeding, then you are avoiding this drug. And of course, if there is an hypersensitivity to this substance. Now, one important warning which I would like to highlight apart from other where you should not give. You are seeing to the renal impairment, you are seeing to the hepatic impairment, you are seeing whether the patients are asthmatic or not, seeing whether other endometrial changes are there or not before giving that drug. You are seeing that other concomitant drugs she is taking for other medical ailments, and what is the bleeding pattern. So before advising her ulipristal, you are seeing certain special warnings and precautions. And this is the which you will find in many books, and this is how ulipristal acts by apoptosis, by this. So this diagram you can find it everywhere. Now, one thing which has to be emphasized is that what is the importance of liver function test when you are giving ulipristal acetate. Your liver function test has to be mandatorily done, and not once, it has to be done time and again. So baseline liver function test has to be done before you start ulipristal. So one of the foremost investigation which has to be kept in mind when giving ulipristal is liver function test. You have a baseline liver function test before you start the treatment. Then for every 1 month course of ulipristal during treatment, every month you do a periodic monitoring of liver function test. After every course, that is, you have given 3 cycles and then you are waiting for the next course, you do a liver function test. You become alert when the liver function test reaches the upper limit of its normal values, and you stop giving it when they are raised above twice the normal. So this is the most important test which has to be mandatorily done when you are prescribing ulipristal acetate. And any signs of liver injury, may it be presented as fatigue, as pain, as anorexia or jaundice, has to be looked off or has to be guarded. What do you expect when you are giving ulipristal? Of course, it has a therapeutic benefit, that is, it is reducing the size. You get a chance to correct the anemia and controls the bleeding. You expect a 79% cases you will have amenorrhea. You expect that in 49% of the cases there would be a shrinking in the size of the fibroid, and of course it would reduce the pain if they were producing some symptoms. And of course everything ends to quality of life, so quality of life would be improved. You can give one course of ulipristal, that is 3 months plus 1 month gap preoperatively. That may be one of the courses you can follow. Of course, it treats anemia because it is not producing any menses, and you're getting time to give iron folic acid to the patient. And again, I'm repeating it that during surgery, the planes are not lost, but what is happening? Central softening of the fibroid is a feature with UPL. So the hard fibroid, there is a central softening and it becomes a little soft. So that may hamper your little surgery when you are that firmness is not there when removing, so that may have a little difficulty. But the surgical pains, that is when you're removing it through the capsule, are not lost. So this is a very good diagram which I could find. So women with reproductive age group with type 2 myomas or multiple myomas, which is, we have seen in the FIGO classification, that is type 2 when it starts touching the myometrium, and type 5 when it is still in the myometrium. Type 5, according to the desire of pregnancy, you would if you find such a myoma and you want to treat it medically, you would first divide it into those who desire pregnancy and those who do not desire pregnancy. Of course, for those who do not desire pregnancy, it becomes similar to those with a perimenopausal or premenopausal woman with the same type of myoma. So those in the reproductive age group, but those who do not desire pregnancy or who have completed their fertility, and those in the perimenopausal age group, the treatment would be, you can give up to 4 courses each of 3 months, and with these serum progesterone receptor modulators. And what do you see? You see the response. If there is a good response, that is if the reduction of the volume of the fibroid is more than or equal to 25% and you can control the symptoms, especially of bleeding, then after 4 courses you can stop the treatment and wait and follow up to the patients, and you can review the patients if there is recurrence of symptoms. And if there is a insufficient response in such patients who are of reproductive age group, maybe 30 to 35, who have completed their fertility but still do not want hysterectomy, in those cases, if you give it for 1 year or 20 months, then if it is insufficient in terms of volume and bleeding, you would resort to surgical treatment. Now coming to those who desire fertility. In those cases, the surgical we are not opting. We are opting for medical. So what we are giving is that we are giving 2 courses of 3 months. So we are giving 3 months, then 1 month gap, then 3 months and 1 month gap. And what do you expect? It is a very good response. See that the volume reduction is decreased by more than 50%. And this would help in when any fibroid which has volume reduction of 50%, we saw in the classification that in the type 2 fibroid was and type 3 fibroid were all classification based on 50% towards the endometrium or towards the myometrium. So where the fibroid size reduced, they maybe it is possible that the uterine cavity, the anatomical problem would be sorted, and then they can try a natural conception as well, and the fibroid is not hampering their fertility now. Of course, if you are getting a good response, we say that the volume reduction is between 25% to 50% and symptoms are controlled, she can still try a natural conception if the uterine cavity is restored. And if the cavity remains distorted or if the myoma remains large due to great volume at the baseline, you can still think of other things like IVF or other artificial assisted reproduction. If you have insufficient response in terms of volume and bleeding, you would then, even if she desires fertility, you would have to resort to myomectomy or surgical procedure. So this is a flow chart which would guide you of the medical management of fibroids. Now seeing to evidence-based management, we move on to the second, that is mifepristone. We saw that the ulipristal acetate induces apoptosis in uterine fibroids, that is natural cell death, and inhibits the proliferation of these cells. We also saw that there is by evidence based that there is no difference in control of menstrual bleeding if you treat it by oral drugs or you treat it by GnRH. However, ulipristal was tolerated better and controlled bleeding more rapidly than the GnRH agonists. The other drug was mifepristone. It is still in the trial and it is still not being used. Has been associated with the development of endometrial changes in some reports, and its use in the treatment of fibroids is still in the research settings. So what are these sperms? It is mifepristone, or also called as RU486. It is an old drug with a new indication. So try it for 3 months. If you can give it for 3 months, the dose is 30 milligram. You can give it as low as 5 milligram per day, or it can increase to 10 to 15 milligram per day. Of course, we know by now that it is a sperm, that is a selective progesterone receptor modulator. It reduces the size of fibroid, more so in the perimenopausal woman. It is an oral drug. The effect is reversible. It is as effective as GnRH agonist and reduces the symptoms and symptomatic fibroids of dysmenorrhea and heavy menstrual bleeding, but long-term effects can cause endometrial hyperplasia. It also acts by inducing apoptosis, that is cell death, decreases angiogenesis and inhibit the cell proliferation. Then we move on to others, that is GnRH agonist. We have learned about GnRH agonists when we were treating abnormal uterine bleeding and other causes of AUB. And we have come to the conclusion that these cause hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism, that is, they act at the level of hypothalamus and therefore they act as causing a chemical reversible menopause. There is chemical because it is hormone related, reversible because once you stop the symptoms can be reversed to it, and menopause because it is acting at the level so that it is not allowing the FSH and LH and therefore there is no estrogen and progesterone. Now, what I want to emphasize in this slide is that when you are giving agonist, and what is the difference from antagonist? The agonists are, as the name suggests, are similar compounds. That is agonist, that is similar to that. So when they are blocking the receptors, the first they cause is that because they have a similar structure as the GnRH, they will first increase. Everything has a threshold, and when the thing has the similar structure, it would cause first increased release of gonadotrophins, and then it would follow desensitization or downregulation of decreasing the FSH and LH, which would later cause a sustained suppression of ovarian function, leading to amenorrhea or hypoestrogenic state. But this initial increase in the rise of gonadotrophins is called as flare-up phenomenon. That is, when you give an agonist, since it has a property similar to the natural GnRH, and it has a, so initially there would be for some time there would be there would be more release of gonadotrophins, and there would be more of FSH and LH, and there would be more of a flare-up phenomenon. This has two effects. One is flare-up, and second, the effect of desensitization and downregulation is a little delayed, because after flare-up the desensitization is occurring. The effect is same, that is, it is causing a hypoestrogenic state when it is acting at the level of hypothalamus, then affecting the pituitary, not allowing the LH and FSH, and therefore acting on the ovary, that is the HPO axis, and causing amenorrhea as an ultimate effect. And of course, anemia comes as a bonus whenever you are having amenorrhea, so the patient is not bleeding, and therefore it is correction of anemia occurs. We discussed that the optimal time of GnRH is 6 months, and beyond 6 months if you give, there are hypoestrogenic effect, and therefore it can affect the bone mineral density. What GnRH do? They decrease the fibroid size and volume effective before surgery. They can decrease the post-operative time, of course, because decrease the operative time because the size is reduced, and post-op also the recovery is better. The side effects we know by now is that it causes hypoestrogenic effect on the bone mineral density, causing more on the trabecular bone, and therefore the patient has osteopenia. And vasomotor symptoms, that is menopausal symptoms, also can be presented. We discussed ADVEC therapy, that is, you may be required to give low dose estrogen and progesterone to combat these hypoestrogenic effect. And what estrogen you give? You give conjugated equine estrogen 0.625 milligram. And what progesterone you give? You give medroxyprogesterone acetate 2.5 milligram, or you can give 5 milligram of norethindrone acetate. What do you do? That is, the reversal on stoppage of therapy occurs. When you stop GnRH, these trabecular bone changes or vasomotor changes, they come back to normal. The drug names are goserelin, neferlin, and this is the new decapeptyl drug, which is triptorelin. The dose is 3.75 milligram, or leuprolide depot 3.75 milligram, given by intramuscular injections, and it can be given monthly for 3 months. Other is Zoladex. The dose is different, 3.6 milligram. It is given not intramuscular but subcutaneous, monthly for 3 months. So this is the GnRH agonist. We have seen the indications. Any medical indication is indication for GnRH agonist. As a thumb rule, when you stop GnRH agonist, you get a 6% bone loss, that is recovery. 6%, if you give it for 6 months therapy of GnRH, you lose 6% bone loss, 6% bone. And when you stop the therapy, 3% of it is reverse. So whole of it is not reversed back, but 6% of the bone loss in 6 months therapy and 3% of regain on reversal of therapy. Preoperatively, what it is doing? It is causing a shrinkage of fibroid size up to 3 months prior to surgery, and maybe it is reducing up to 35%. And of course, we saw that it is correcting the anemia. Perimenopausal, you can give it for short term as an alternative to surgery, or in high risk cases where you are avoiding surgery, you can give GnRH. Always remember, the plane is something which is lost when you're giving GnRH agonist. So in ulipristal, we saw that the planes are not lost. But in GnRH agonist, plane is something which is lost when you are giving GnRH agonist. And what is the disadvantage? When we will see the surgical methods, we will see that when you try to remove the fibroids in myomectomy, you are shelling it out of the pseudocapsule, and therefore this shelling becomes difficult because that plane, that area which you want to remove it is lost, and therefore associated fibrosis occurs, and that surgery becomes, instead of easy, it becomes difficult. So disadvantage of GnRH becomes they are injectables, they are painful injections. Hypoestrogenic effect it is producing because it is affecting both of the estrogen and progesterone receptors, and of course the limit use is limited for 6 months at the most. You have all the vasomotor symptoms of hot flushes, vaginal dryness, and decreased libido. There is risk of development of osteoporosis if it is given for more than 6 months, and of course even if you give it and do not resort to surgery, there is a recurrence because everything reverts back in this, and cost is very high. So now we have discussed both GnRH and the progesterone receptor modulators. So how do they act? GnRH acts, that is agonist or agonist we are talking about, acts at the level of hypothalamus and pituitary. They have a direct action on the pituitary, inducing downregulation and desensitization of the GnRH receptor, producing a hypogonadotrophic state with consequent reduction in both estrogen and progesterone. What about the modulators? They have been acting on the pituitary, they have been acting on direct action on the pituitary and producing amenorrhea by inhibiting the ovulation part and maintaining the mid-follicular phase of estradiol. So estradiol is not much affected. What about fibroids? They act a direct action on the fibroids, reducing their size through inhibition of the cell. We saw apoptosis. And of course, being a progesterone, it would have its effect on the endometrium as well. It would stop the uterine bleeding. It would result in a reversible changes of the progesterone, which we called as progesterone receptor modulator associated endometrial changes, or PAEC. So this is the mechanism of action of, or difference in the mechanism of action of both GnRH agonist and serum progesterone receptor modulator. Now there is one more thing, GnRH antagonist, that is which acts opposite to agonist. So these are antagonists. All the benefits are same as what we have discussed with agonist. The only difference is that being an antagonist, they do not cause that initial flare up. So when they do not cause that initial flare up, the onset of amenorrhea would be rapid. So that time would be gained. And immediate suppression of the hypothalamo-pituitary axis, gonadal axis, there would be hypothalamo-pituitary hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism, and therefore there would be FSH-LH decrease, and therefore there is no estrogen and progesterone. Everything is same. Apart from that, the initial flare-up is not there, so that time is saved and the effect would be rapid. And this stimulatory effect is spared. And the drug molecules of these are cetrorelix and granurelix. And the dosing is 60 milligram, which is given as intramuscular injections, and they have to be repeated every 3 months. So the reproductive challenges we saw, that I am again repeating the slide of the last lecture, is that one was progesterone. We discussed progesterone and its GnRH part. Now, apart from that, in the slide we discussed that the cellular biology of myoma also has certain interesting findings which are pertaining to infertility. And these are prolactin levels. We found a very high levels of prolactin in the fibroid tissue, especially in the follicular phase. And this prolactin would act as a stimulator or proliferation of the myoma cells by the protein kinase cascade. So prolactin was found in the fibroid tissue. Another thing which we found was strikingly high levels of aromatase. Fibroids express aromatase, that is strikingly high levels, than the surrounding myometrium, to the extent that it is 3 times more. And this, what does this aromatase do? It converts the estrogen to active estradiol, and therefore we found that estrogen also has a role in the promotion of the fibroid growth. So aromatase was also another thing which caused a fibroid growth. And when we found that aromatase messenger RNA was found in 91% of the myoma, and it was not detectable when the myomectomy was done. So these two also find their place as a medical treatment of fibroid. So when it is more of aromatase, what you will give? Aromatase inhibitors. And what is the drug? Letrozole. Letrozole, of course, it is in the preliminary stage and there is insufficient evidence. Letrozole is basically a drug which is used for infertility, for induction of ovulation, but for treatment of fibroids, there is insufficient evidence. Nevertheless, studies show that letrozole is the drug, or aromatase inhibitor is the drug which can be used. Especially with those who are reaching perimenopause and you just want to give medical treatment and you don't have to have side effects, you can give aromatase inhibitors. The choice of patients would be those with a small myomas of less than 4 centimeter, and if they have 2 or 3 myomas, each myoma should be very small, that is 2 centimeter in size. What is the dose you give? You give 2.5 milligram per day and continuous for 3 months. What do? They block the aromatase activity. It inhibits the conversion of androgen to estrogen and thus decreasing the growth of the myoma, especially useful in perimenopause, and the decrease in size and volume of the myoma and associated symptoms can be seen. What about prolactin? We saw that the center of fibroid was a point where prolactin was produced. And of course, pituitary also is a gland which produces prolactin. So, the action on the myometrium as a growth hormone in the form of both autocrine and paracrine effect. And what we can do, since it is producing prolactin, is that we can give prolactin lowering agents which can inhibit the growth of the myoma and improve the symptoms. And what is the drug of choice? The drug of choice is cabergoline. And the dose is 0.5 milligram, which has to be given once a weekly, and you can continue it. Of the various side effects, the major side effect is gastrointestinal side effect, nausea, vomiting, and of the various contraindications, the most important is that you avoid giving in those who have cardiac ailments. Now this is just a revision. You have seen in AUB that LNG-IUS is a treatment for any abnormal uterine bleeding, and so much so that AUBL or abnormal uterine bleeding because of the leiomyoma would also have effects on the LNG-IUS. So when you are giving LNG-IUS in a patient of myoma, you can use it for those who have intramural fibroids because it is something we are putting in the cavity. So if the fibroid is in the myoma, a myometrium, it would be more effective. And of course, those who do not desire pregnancy because you are giving a contraceptive. And it has not to be used where there is a submucous myoma affecting the cavity which has to be removed. We saw that all submucous myomas have to be treated, and so you have to remove it by hysteroscopy. LNG-IUS thus can be used as a symptomatic relief, and it decreases the size of the fibroid and volume of the fibroid. The common side effects, of course, of any LNG-IUS, irregular bleeding that may last for over 6 months, hormone-related problems such as breast tenderness, aches and headaches can be there. It is less commonly, it can produce amenorrhea, and very rarely it can cause perforation at the time of insertion. So you have to be careful. The drugs are stenzomic acid. We know by now that it decreases menorrhagia, heavy menstrual bleeding and dysmenorrhea. The side effects are indigestion, diarrhea, headaches. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are NSAIDs. They are used for pain and dysmenorrhea and menorrhagia. Common side effects are indigestion and diarrhea. Rarely it can cause worsening of the asthma in sensitive individuals. And of course it has GI side effects like peptic ulcer with possible bleeding and peritonitis. The oral progestogens or oral drugs we discussed were norethistones, so they can reduce the size. We have discussed time and again in the treatment of AUB. Side effects are common: weight gain, bloating, breast tenderness, headaches, acne, and rare side effect is they can cause depression. Injectable progesterones also are available. They decrease the size. The common side effects is weight gain, irregular bleeding, and amenorrhea. There is something called premenstrual-like syndrome, that is the patient has bloating, fluid retention and breast tenderness because you are giving progesterone, so premenstrual side effects come. Less common, a small loss of bone mineral density can be there and largely recovered when the treatment is discontinued. We of course mentioned the drugs like danazol, gestrinone, raloxifene. They are not used. Danazol is not used. It is anti-androgenic. It was an old drug, but now being cited because of the androgenic side effects. It once used, it has to be used for 3 to 6 months. Amenorrhea due to antigonadotropin and androgen agonist action. So, raloxifene is a drug which is a selective estrogen receptor modulator. We have been talking about selective progesterone receptor modulator. So, there is a drug called raloxifene which is a selective estrogen receptor modulator but not of much use. So coming to the end of the medical treatment, the drawbacks of the available medical therapies are the OCPs can often treat menorrhagia and dysmenorrhea, but there is breakthrough bleeding, and in some cases it may cause an increase because of the estrogen part. If the estrogen has the quantity in the contraceptive, the estrogen is high dose. LNG IUD leads to more irregular or breakthrough bleeding. Of course, the system can be expulsion or perforation can be there. Coming to GnRH, monthly injections are required, for 3 to 6 months are required. Transient reversible effect is that suppression of estradiol as well occurs, so that it causes hypoestrogenic side effects and patient can complain vasomotor symptoms and of course bone mineral density. So, pre-op GnRH analogs are not a preferable drug of choice, are not recommended before surgery because it affects the planes. So, it is not a drug of choice before surgery. And of course it can be given to correct anemia. If it is very, very severe and you want to buy time, then of course you can resort to that. Coming to ADVEC therapy, we talked about ADVEC therapy in GnRH. You give estrogen and progesterone, but not in the form of oral contraceptive. Not taking low dose oral contraceptive as a ADVEC therapy because it contains a different type of estrogen. So we would have 1 or 2 slides and then we would have a break. NICE recommendation says that of medical treatment, if a fibroid is less than 3 centimeter, first line of treatment becomes an intrauterine contraceptive device. Then you give tranexamic acid and mefenamic acid, that is NSAID, or in cases of progesterone, you can resort to oral progesterone. If if it is more than 3 centimeter, you're just buying time, you're buying it for the correction of anemia, then you resort to ulipristal for number of courses. What about when it is not resolving? If it is less than 3 centimeter, you have tried these and it is not resolved, then you resort to endometrial ablation or other modalities of treatment. If it is more than 3 centimeter, you have given UPA, that is you have tried medical treatment for 3 or 4 courses and it is not resolved, you go to the surgical part of either myomectomy or hysterectomy.